Well, I was going to ask about what I see as collateral damage of all these different versions of the same article. To me, librarians ought to be making that, they ought to be having a role in in validating the correct version of an article instead of having all these different versions of the same article posted. And open access is not helping that.
No, you're absolutely right. I was on I'll bring up two projects that I've been involved with. I was on a NISO working group a number of years ago that attempted to approach this issue just from the standpoint of how do we talk about the different versions. And so we came up with what was published as I think a NISO best practice on just the terminology to be used for an author's manuscript or the version of record or whatever. So at least when we're talking about this stuff, we're using the same terminology, and as people are applying metadata, they're doing it consistently. And I've been happy to see that in the 3 years or so since that came out, it has been adopted and used more frequently in the publishing community. So I think there's some success there. But again, that was an effort that was driven much more by the publishing community than it was by the library community. Whereas I would agree that you would think that we would be very much concerned with that issue. The other thing that I've been involved with that addresses this in a slightly different way was what we refer to as the Scholarly Publishing Roundtable, which was put together at the request of the House Committee on Science and Technology in the summer of '09, and we issued our report in January of 2010. Very interesting group, and my two colleagues who will be on the Executive Roundtable tomorrow, or on Friday, participated in that group with me. But we had 3 university provosts, 3 librarians, representatives from 4 publishers, a couple of researchers. There were 13 of us altogether, I guess, trying to come up with a consensus view of how to really provide good public access. And the reason that this committee was brought together was people in the House Committee and people in the new Obama White House had seen what had happened for the development of the NIH policy and how ugly and confrontational that process had gotten. They knew that we were eventually going to want to develop similar policies for the other federal funding agencies, but they wanted a better, more measured approach. And so setting up this committee that we did our work not exactly in secret, but not very publicly, so that we were able to have our disagreements and arguments in private and then issue a pretty thorough report that represented a consensus of these views. There were 2 dissenting views, which, not surprisingly, were the representative from Elsevier and the representative from Public Library Science, who agreed on almost every point. And if you look at their disagreement was about the appropriate role of the government. It was not about open access. It was not about these other issues. It was about how activist should the federal government be in mandating certain solutions. From the Elsevier side, they want as little interference from the government as possible, as you would expect. From the Public Library of Science side, they see a strong opportunity for a strong government role. But that's a very different debate from the one we tend to have. What we came up with in looking at our recommendations was that to have really good, valid public access that is sustainable, access is only one piece of it. A focus on the version of record and the curated, stewarded version of record is critical, so you really know what you're dealing with. Interoperability standards are really, really important so that you can start to do computing across really large bodies of literature, and then the preservation issues have to really be addressed. So our recommendations were a much more complex set of issues that we would want policies built around than just this notion of let's deposit the author's manuscript somewhere and we've solved the open access problem.
As far as, was there any discussion or concern expressed by folks about open access possibly lowering the bar, the scholarly bar, in terms of interfering with traditional peer review?
No. I mean, that issue comes up, but it doesn't seem to me that it has much validity. I mean, there have certainly been some sort of dodgy entrance into the open access by transaction payment space. But there's a lot of crummy publishers and crummy journals in traditional publishing. So I don't see that open access makes that situation better or worse. Certainly the public library science journals, the Biomed Central journals, lots and lots of smaller independent OA journals are every bit as rigorous and sound as traditional publishing. So I think that notion has been tossed around in the heat of the debates, but I don't think that there's much to it.
So open access journals are developing the prestige that's out there among some.
Yeah, I mean the public library science journals have.
Right.
Many of the Biomed Central journals, if you just look at things like impact factor, are every bit as competitive as traditional journals in their field. No, I was at a dinner last night, and somebody who works in a small liberal arts college mentioned that she still runs into a situation with students coming in whose professors have said you can't use anything from the internet. You know, so there is this whole range of things. So we were joking that the way that you do that is you print off a PDF of an article and then make a smudgy photocopy of that they can take in, because then it looks like it came out of the print version of the journal.
That's another area where libraries need to contact the faculty
Right.
and explain a few things to them.
So I think that there certainly is that range of opinion, and there is suspicion and skepticism of open access journals for a whole variety of reasons, like damage to peer review. But I don't think that there's much to that.
What do you think is going to happen? You mentioned impact factor. What's going to, I mean, I was noticing that Australia has sort of taken that down as a way to evaluate faculty research. At our college, impact factor is stressed. You have to find the impact factor of your journal, and of course if it's in the humanities, that's not going to be there.
Right.
If the journal is in the humanities. But there are other areas where there's work up toward the impact factor. I mean, what is going...
That's not an area in which I feel that I have a lot of expertise. I know that there's a lot of work being done looking at other metrics, and particularly looking at article level metrics. And I think there's been a big project out of the UK, and I think somebody's presenting on that at this conference. So there certainly has been a lot of pushback against the impact factor, and a lot of work to develop alternatives to the impact factor over the last 5 or 6 years. It's not clear to me how far that has penetrated into the minds of department chairs and tenure committees yet.
Based on the College of Charleston, it hasn't.
Yeah. So it's, I think it will make headway.